what the ins and outs of are from a physiotherapy point of view with rowing. I'm going to tie that in with my background as a, I say a 35-year plus rower, and what things kind of work and how we apply that with technique. So the bottom line, at the end of this talk, you should go away with a bit of knowledge of going, all right, I know how I can stay on top of my injuries, and I know how I can stay and avoid them, prevent them. So just a little bit about me. I've been involved in rowing injury management for over 25 years. This is from screening level, looking at schoolboy screenings, dealing with international, national and Olympic level athletes. I have rowed state, national, international level. I'm presently rowing back with Masters again, and I row in the curtain crew of the Black Swan. Four of us sitting there in that photo. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to talk from the corner here. Now I've introduced myself. It's usually to do with triangular fibrocartilage injury, which is one of the small articular surfaces in your wrist. And that usually is where someone is using an excessive gripping strategy with rowing, but more commonly it's where they're actually being injured off the water, so doing push-ups or anything that's where their hands are locked in extension. Elbow injuries, we do see your classic kind of tennis elbow and golfer's elbow, which is called lateral or medial epicondylitis. Again, they can be related more to off-the-water injuries and overuse injuries with land-based training. It can be to do with over-gripping. That's probably the most common one I do see with upper limb injuries, where instead of taking the catch with long, straight arms and hanging off the oar, you grab the catch, and so it tends to work and overuse the forearm muscles. And namely, that's where we see poor engagement of the scapular muscles. So when you come and see us from a physio perspective, that's what we'll start to retrain with you. Shoulder impingement, again, it's not really a sport where we're lifting our arms or elbows above our shoulders, so we don't really see a lot of impingement-based injuries. I do see a handful of these with masters rowers, and again, that can be developed from more land-based training rather than rowing. So kind of at the moment, rowing sounds pretty cool. It doesn't really cause many injuries, right? So the main injuries that we do see that are more common, like I said, is your lumbar spine injuries, your lower back, rib stress fractures, as I alluded to before, they're becoming more common. Hip pain, and that's it's a new, more presentation that we're only really seeing over the last 10 years, and I'll expand upon that a little bit later on, and knee pain. Interesting statistic, this is a very, very recent paper with the Wilson group. It's an American study that they looked at, reviewing a large cohort of rowers in the US, and they found that 2 out of 3 rowers over a 12-month period will experience lower back pain, whereas in the normal population, 1 out of 3 will experience lower back pain. So rowing itself would appear to be quite a lumbar or lower back pain risk sport. So let's delve into a little bit more deeply. What gets damaged when we actually have lower back pain? Well, 80% of the lower back pain that I see, and this is not just rowers, it's across the board, are muscular-based injuries. And most of those injuries will be a protective muscle spasm, and usually that'll last about 3 to 5 days. These are the ones where you've lifted something awkwardly in the gym, or you've lifted or moved some furniture, you feel stiff, it feels really, really sore for the first couple of days, but pretty well by the end of the week you're moving well and it's all fine. You may have sought some treatment. That's pretty well your straight muscle strain. They can last, protective muscle spasm. Anything that lasts longer than that point will be a muscle strain. So your body's really switched on. It will actually create a protection mechanism, like a splint, putting your arm in a splint. And that will last about 3 to 4 days. A strain is where you've actually broken components of the actual muscle, and that needs time to heal. So your basic football player in an NFL team, you see them quad strain, we're looking at 3 to 4 weeks. Hamstring strain, 3 to 4 weeks. with more serious kind of strain. Light strain, 1 to 2 weeks. Disc injuries. Now, the most common thing that we do see in this population of the general population is people worried about getting a disc injury. Disc injuries are very, very rare. So over the course of this week, I've probably only seen 2. Over the course of the month, I've probably only seen 4. So disc injuries is something that we immediately have been led to believe are really weak components. They're not. They're incredible components that heal very, very well. Otherwise, we would have died out with the dinosaurs years ago if they didn't have the possibility of us regenerating and healing. Discs will heal. The protruding discs, those elements, they will heal over a 4 to 6 week period. The words prolapse, protruding, slip disc, they're all the same thing. It's just all different lay terms explaining the same thing. So someone will often come to this, oh, I had a prolapsed disc back 3 years ago, it's still hurting now. And it's not really, it actually healed over that period. What you're experiencing is either a muscle imbalance or some other component that you're creating protective mechanism with. The other one is extruded disc. So this is where the disc has exploded and all the materials seeped out. It sounds really bad, right? They heal up quicker than protruding disc. They heal up in about 4 to 5 weeks. The chronicity in that, so what we call term chronicity is where you've had pain for longer than 6 weeks. So that is due to protective guarding and tissue that becomes hypersensitive. So quickly what I mean by that is if you cut the sole of your foot, you will walk on the outside of your foot, right? And after about a week of walking on the sole of your foot, one day you'll put your foot flat, you'll expect pain, oh no it's not, and then you'll walk normally. If you walked on the outside of your foot for 3 weeks, all the muscles on the outside of your foot would tense up, or the muscles on the inside would be weak. When you try to put that foot flat, it's the pain from the protective mechanism that then creates that pain cycle. And our pain system is archaic. If we look at all our sensory and motor systems, which are the muscle systems, they're like fibre optic cables. They're really, really fast and good at processing and targeting where your sensory deficit comes from. Pain fibres, they look like telegraph wires. They're really, really old in our system, and for that reason, they're really, really dull at trying to pinpoint pain, but they govern our lives to a greater degree. Disc degeneration that we see on MRIs is a normal finding. If you have an MRI and you find that it's common on disc degeneration, that doesn't mean you have back pain. This means your back has a degree of safe, normal degeneration, depending on the severity of it. It's a caveat I put over the top of it. And a nice little study that Cohen did in 2021 is showed that disc degeneration does not affect loading of the spine during rowing. That makes sense because a big part of what we do with rowing is actually the muscle component that's supporting our body through that. The spinal segments, the structural components, are not really involved if we take the weight out of that system. Good example is that if we've got a mast, we're going to build a mast here over a boat. That mast itself stands erect because of the aluminium through it, right? And if we blow lots of wind and forces on it, it'll bend, it'll distort, it may even break. Now if I put shrouds and stays on it, all that mast is being secured by is the external wiring, and that's the same as our body. The greater amount of the strain that's been put through our spine is the muscular control, and it's the one key thing that we find that people tend to decondition to a degree. Fractures, we don't see a lot of fractures in rowers because it tends to be what we call an extension injury, hyperextension injury with footballers, with runners, with situations. All right, we adapt. We are amazing healing machines, as I touched on before. And the key thing, and one key thing I want you to take away from this talk tonight is rowing is a flexion-based sport. Throughout the stroke, all the biomechanical studies, our spine does not move out of extension. So what I mean by that is in this position I'm standing at the moment is neutral. If I lean back through my back and arch, that's extension. This is flexion. So through the entire stroke, even at the finish, the back will not go out of flexion. So we are constantly loading in flexion, and it's not a bad thing. Recent study, this was looked at elite cyclists, found that these cyclists who were constantly in flexion actually had an adaptive change. All 18 of them found that the disc height in those particular cyclists all increased body's amazing. It adapts, it changes. It's not something that you have to go, no, I can't use it anymore. You need an operation, you've got to go down that track. Some people do, but not the majority that we think. So flexion is not a bad thing. All right, we're going to dive into the more specific things of growing. All right, so nice, again, recent study, riders with back pain will lose their ability to their spinal pelvic coordination, which results in greater upper lumbar flexion. Your lumbar is this section here, your lower back. So what happens is they lose the ability to coordinate this section. They tend to sink in more flexion or pivot through it. However, a rigid upper back will create more load at the lower back. Quick quiz. 2 riders in the foreground there. Which one do you think is more likely to develop back pain or maybe has back pain? Left or right? Everybody said right, put your hand up. Everybody said left, put your hand up. Oh, it's equal. Okay, that's good. So what's happening here is the rower on the right here is creating a rigid upper back strategy. You can tell that through the first part of that stroke, he's actually opened his back up early, right? He's got nothing really left to give. This guy here is hanging off the blade and is engaging nicely through a degree of flexion. Perhaps a little bit excessive, but it's a fellow on the right that's creating more of the rigidity, that's putting actually more load on his lower back. I'll try and explain that to you, what's going on, and what I call the fishing rod principle. So a fishing rod, it's designed to be thick at the base and then it tapers to the top. So the top's really whippy, it's a lot more mobile, middle bit not so whippy, but still mobile, bottom bit quite rigid. So we can see on the right, on the left here, we've got the spine that's kind of doing that. We've got the top bit moving more, the bottom bit's a bit more rigid. Into the center here, tucking your pelvis underneath you, now off that spine, is creating more movement at this lower segment here. If I make all these rigid, if I make my fishing rod and I put a splint on it, and so it doesn't move, and try and bend it, all the load's going to go down low here. So rigidity up higher will move lower tension and create more load down low. Does that kind of make sense? I'm speeding through this too, so feel free at any point to ask me questions as well, because I'm just conscious of time. Does anyone know who these 2 guys are? Okay. Wow.
Come on, guys.
Someone does know and they're just being shy. Thank you, Ingrid. That's James Tompkins and Drew Jean. So this is the final of the Athens Olympics in the Cox's pair. James Tompkins, one of the greatest rowers in Australian history, represented his country, I think, at least 5 times in 5 Olympics. This was an amazing race. If you ever want to, if you're interested in rowing and you love your racing, especially if you love Cox's pairs, watch this race on YouTube. These guys were so confident of how they were doing this race. They had a fantastic race plan. Their plan was to be at the 500 metre mark, they'd just be in front, by counts. This was in their plan. So by the time they got to the 1,000 metre mark, they wanted to edge out and have a clear length over the rest of the field. 1,500 metre mark, as we all know, that's kind of is where you're going to make your change. They were going to put out a 2-length lead over the rest of the field. And they did, they executed all this. The audacious bit that they did in their race plan, that they said they were going to do, is they want to stop rowing a length before the finish to take in the environment. Isn't that cool? And they did it, they executed that, to the point where you watched them all stop rowing, take in the crowd, and win. It wasn't arrogance, it was just confidence, and they just wanted to take in that moment. So, I love to be that. But what I want to point out here, you can see how the lower back section here constantly remains in flexion through 2 of Australia's probably greatest rowers. Drew Jean did have issues with his back. He got on top of that. James Tompkins never had lower back pain in his life. Constantly in flexion through that. Through the finish position, coming forward halfway through, and then through that midway drive. So you might be saying, well, Greg, that's 20 years ago, so surely things may have changed. Well, does anyone know who these guys are?
Danish form from Europe Murray.
Excellent. Yeah, probably two of the greatest rowers, full stop, in the world in terms of they've won. I think they've won 3 Olympics in the Cox's pair, and multiple. They've been undefeated. No one's actually physically beaten them on the world stage. You can see similar rowing patterns: constant flexion at catch, mid drive, and at that finish position. Very, very similar to. That means that it must be a gas leak.
Sorry, I was just getting excited.
Pushing the buttons. And you can see at the back again at the finish position, they're staying in flexion. So, where am I going with all this? The most common thing I see when I'm teaching or doing reviews in school programs is a variety of different coaches that will have different interpretations of rowing stroke. And commonly they'll be under the impression that you have to have your back sat up straight, especially at the catch. That your spine should always be in neutral or vertical, shouldn't go out of flexion. Unfortunately, what that does is uses 2 different systems, and our body needs both, one of 2 systems, and our body needs both systems to work very, very effectively. And these muscles don't work in separately. You won't just get your hamstring working. They'll work as just one big, what we call sling or chain. So the 2 slings that we commonly look at from a physio perspective and from a muscle training perspective is your posterior longitudinal sling, which is this one on the left, and that's made up of your rectus spinae, these big column-based muscles running down the middle here, your hamstrings, and then going into your gastroc complex. Your posterior oblique sling is the one on the right here, which is made up of your lat and then your glute max, and then the outer fibres of your quadricep, your outer fibres of your hamstring and biceps femoris. So you can see how that one on the right there, it acts like a big blanket, right? You see that kind of hugging and enveloping the back. So we use that one on the right as our primary protective mechanism for rowing. That's the sling that we engage with. The posterior longitudinal sling we'll use if we're squatting and we have to stay in that neutral position. We'll use it for running. So if I'm dealing with an AFL footy player, I'm working a lot on posterior longitudinal sling retraining. With rowers, the one on the right, and it's the one that often is overlooked. Anyone who's, so if I want to use this sling pattern through here, it'll be something like a deadlift, right? So I'm keeping my back straight, working through my hamstrings. However, again, I'm not rowing like that, am I? Because I'm always in flexion. So it means all that beautiful training I'm doing for these columns muscles is at a mechanical disadvantage through the stroke, unless I try to brace, but the bracing won't work. So it's retraining a lot of this sling system. And the key one is a component called the thoraco lumbar fascia. Now your thoraco lumbar fascia, sorry, we'll go back to this, is made that connects your glute here to the opposite lat, that white section through there. So when I'm in this position here, and you can see through my lats, that section there, that is the blanket that's supporting my back. And then you have to train that to actually load it. So that's why I can pick up something off the ground here in flexion, and I'm not going to cause myself any injury. Now, 10 or 5 years ago, you've got to pick this up, you've got to keep the back straight. Well, no, we've got to have both systems in play. If you train this system all the time, when you go into that system that you haven't trained, then that's where you potentially get an injury. And that's what we will see with a number of rowers who present with lower back pain. So, a little bit about that. So, thoraco lumbar fascia connects the lactoids to the glute, as I said. It also connects in through your abdominal muscles at the front, so it has a big role with your core then as well. Provides strength and stability and flexion, as I was saying, that's that bending forward. Primary support structure for the back through the drive phrase in the rowing stroke. This is the really kind of cool thing about this particular muscle, and it makes a lot of sense too. everywhere else in our body, the fascia that we have, so that's your tendon Achilles, it'll be your tennis elbow kind of tendons, it'll be the ones in your shoulders, these tendons there. Or tendon fascia can be interchangeable to a degree. As we get older, they all get thinner. But the thoraco lumbar fascia does the opposite, it gets thicker as we get older. Now the key thing about this particular muscle is that we have to have the ability to dissociate it. So the fascia is like a big blanket, and it's over your back, and so as I move, as I bend forward, it should move independently of the structures underneath it. When it becomes thickened, it gets all stiff. That's why when you wake up in the morning and you don't normally have back pain during the day, you're all stiff and creaky, and that fascia basically is just really stuck to the bottom. Move a little bit and then it's fine. It's not, don't get me wrong here, this is not a fabulous new finding. This is very, 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 very common, thoraco lumbar fascia. It's not a cause of back pain. It's just one of those things that happen with age. However, with rowing, it's something that we need to be really focused, that we're looking at training these components. Interesting thing though is that the thoraco lumbar fascia is also made up of smooth muscle. Now that is new. And what smooth muscle is it's an autonomic nervous system based component, which means that when you are in your fight or flight or your rest and breed process, there'll be an association with it. So in environments where you're super stressed and you get this back pain, or you had a little bit of back pain, your back pain gets worse when you're stressed, that's where we kind of see the thoraco lumbar fascia being involved, where you're creating that bracing strategy. So we can get that link between stress and anxiety with those components. Okay, so putting this in context then. So this is Ron Stock. So he rows with us in Flat Swans. Ron is arguably probably one of the most powerful rowers to come out of Western Australia. At the age of 52, he is still pulling ergos that are similar to guys at an open level. He won the bronze medal in the Atlanta Olympics in the quad, and I think even at the time he might have had the highest ergo in Australia. Very, very powerful rower. So what happens, this fascia that I was talking about, it also has the ability to contract, but it also can become deconditioned. So when you're not rowing for a long period of time, and it's probably the thing I see most is ex-rowers who have back pain. Like within a couple of years of rowing, some of them report, I've got back pain. And when they go back to rowing, they don't have back pain. So it's kind of, it's a bit weird. But what's happening? If you get back pain that's not related to this guy would kind of turn off a little bit or have a bit of a holiday. So that's why it'll allow you to brace and walk around like this. Whilst that component has been splintered, it allows you to heal. And funny enough, when you return to rowing, you'll try and use that bracing strategy, where you tend to overuse these thick columnar muscles, which was that posterior longitudinal sling that I was showing you earlier on. As I touched on before, we've got the ability, it should have the ability to dissociate and move independent of other muscle structures. So I was hoping to have time, but I don't think I will. We've got a real-time ultrasound machine, so what I do with patients is we put it on their back, and we can actually look and see how much of that dissociation you can get. So people with back pain will see that's really, really stiff. People who are progressing really well, we can see that independent kind of movement with the back. But why I brought up this photo, again, we can see lovely loading of Ron's back through the power component of the stroke. Nice inflection. And what we're rowing against this pathway floor that was on the other side there. And quite nicely, we're almost in about the same position of the stroke. So you can see that these fellas, don't worry, I've done this before. These guys are creating a degree of rigidity across the top. They don't have a confidence through the back. Not all of them, but in particular the stroke guy here. You can visualise he's opened his body up early. You'll hear me say this a lot this evening. It's one of the things that I see with people who don't have confidence in loading their flexion components, that they'll tend to open up early. As they're trying to use that extension system with those posterior longitudinal sling muscles. And then that is creating more of a force vector potentially through the lower back. So getting that hang creates that, and again, that's not just Ron there, I showed you those images of the two international rowers creating the same thing. Okay, so how do we create a degree of resilience with these muscles? So there's a thing which is called Jefferson curl, which is, I'll demonstrate that. And the guys here who I work with, we've modified it and they call it the Kerr Squat, which is a bit embarrassing, but it's nice to have a squat named after you. That's it. All my partner named squat after you. So what a Jefferson squat is, a Jefferson curl is you roll down from the top, you're keeping your legs straight. What we do with the other squat is we roll down, once we get to mid-shin, we bend our knees and come back. What's effective about it is we can then dissociate and load that thoraco lumbar fascia. We can then expose it to further load with about 10 to 20% of your body weight, with a weight, sorry. And like I said, it works good with it in terms of dissociation. So what I'd like to do is I'll get you all to stand up because it's probably the mid-talk stretch. I want you to experience that. So let me talk through it first before you go through it with me. So naturally we're led to believe, or we are promoted to kind of really think about keeping your back straight. I hope I've proven to you so far you don't keep your back straight all the time, and that's fine. The big thing that we've seen in the recent studies into posture is that we kind of always thought we should sit up straight. I thought I did too. But what they've found is that has no relationship with in terms of back pain. What's important is that you have postural variety, that you can sit in extension, you can sit in flexion, and you can come back to neutral. If you sustain one continuous position, then that's going to create more of an issue, potentially. So with the Kerr squat, what we're doing is rolling down and draw your belly button underneath your ribs, all right? Suck it right in underneath here, all right? Now, as you do that, you'll feel that you've created tension through your abs, and you can feel that tension come around to your back. Can everyone feel that? All right. Now, roll down just like you'd be rolling off the back of a slide, and stop mid-shin. At this point here, I want you to bend down until your chest touches onto your thighs. Then change direction by straightening your legs first, and then unravel on the way back up. Then release that contraction, all right? So what you're doing there is you're manifesting tension by creating your tension through your abs, which is pre-tensioning if anything that they struggle with. They want to use that opening mechanism. This allows them to get low. Key thing with it is you should feel sore a little bit afterwards. Just in the same way, if I took you all down in the gym and I got you all to do bicep curls, you walk away, oh man, that's sore. Doesn't mean you're injured, it means we've created adaptation. But where you should feel it is more out to the sides. If you feel it in the middle here, that's where you've used that longitudinal swing strategy. And of course, all these are with the caveat that if you have back pain, it's probably something that you probably need to come and see me, and we can kind of make sure we can guide you safely through this process with it. Core test, all right. Part of what I wanted to talk to you tonight is about how to firstly assess your core. Everyone can have a seat there, thank you. And how to train with it. Core is a big, huge buzzword, and to tell you the truth, I still find that there's a lot of people in the health industry that really don't understand it. Can I have a volunteer? Oh, there you go. These two are really nervous. All right. Okay. I'll get you to hop.
Shoes on?
Shoes on is fine. Just on your back. So for those who don't know, so this torture room is we do what we call FUMO. It's called functional movement exercise therapy, which is kind of like Pilates on steroids. It's a lot more functional-based work using Pilates-based machinery, and that's what this is here. This is a reformer. So what's your name?
Sophie.
So have your feet up in here. Okay, so now let me grab this. The language isn't too bad, guys, in terms of I'm not talking too much kind of high-end kind of stuff that you don't understand. It's all right. I'm not swearing. I didn't know that kind of message, but if they let me know if I'm talking excessively too much lingo. Okay, so I'm going to show you. I know you won't all be able to see this, but I'll use it on the scribe. So the core complex that we have through our body here is often just lazily returned to our abdominals. If we plank, it'll make our core strong. Yeah, it will, but it'll just make your abs stronger. Your abs aren't actually just your core. Your core is really the component that's linking across here. So if we were kind of wearing Superman undies, it's pretty well that whole red area that Superman has on his undies there. It creates what we call force closure, bringing these two hip bones together, and creates a nice strategy for us for all the big muscles in the legs to attach to. We've got 4 abdominals. We have a sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Okay. We have 2 obliques on the side here. These are our external obliques. These are the ones that wrap around the side here. And then we have our internal oblique, which the fibers run up this way, again coming around the side. Then we have this guy, the one we all want, our 6-pack muscle, right? It's a really dumb muscle, all right? It just runs up and down the middle here. It just helps us with flexion. That's about it. Kind of looks good, but it's not as functional as the other 2. It's the 4th one then, which is really interesting. It's called your transverse abdominis. All the fibers go across here, they wrap right around the body. Now, even in the best anatomical studies, they find that your transverse abdominis and your internal oblique down here, you can't pull them apart, they're the same muscle. And again, that's the danger where you think of muscles separately. But that's more of a physio talk. But I want you to notice something that's really unusual with this muscle. Can anyone kind of see it there? Snake for the person who gets it, not a snake. Weird, yes.
Looks like it's cutting a lot.
It looks like there's a hole in it, right? Yeah, there is. So there's a hole here. What the hell? Why did they put a hole in this muscle? So what's happening is your transverse abdominis then, and it makes more sense when I put the rectus abdominis. Can you see how over the rectus abdominis, this muscle goes over the top of it? So what we're seeing is your rectus abdominis coming up here, the lower abdominals go over the top of that muscle, and above it they go underneath it. That creates that rigidity or that core stability across that area to make it more effective. That big dumb rectus abdominis muscle now has a purchase system because we can pull that area in close to allow that to work more effectively. So what I find in the majority of people is that when they're trying to do core work, what they're doing is they're just really working their 6-pack muscle, which might be a little bit disappointing because you think, well, why haven't I got a 6-pack then? But what's happening is there's more to do with that post-tissue but what we want to see is all 4 of those components working effectively. So with Sophie then, what I'm going to get her to think about, I'll get you to have one hand here, Sophie, for me. So with palpating just along where your belt would sit, and again, visualise what I just showed you on there. This is where that lower abdominal is going over your rectus abdominis. I'm going to ask Sophie to lift this leg, and then lift the other leg. Can you feel your tummy poke out? Go back down again. So lift up one leg, and the other one. Yep. So what happens is the stomach and the rectus abdominis has just gone bloop. And so the transverse muscle that it goes across of it isn't actually engaging. It hasn't been working. This is a quick little deviation I'm going to talk to you about as well, because again, it's been falsified a little bit too much. We're led to believe that we should contract our core. We should engage our core. We should have that on. When you were 7, you didn't engage your core. When you were 12, you didn't engage your core. In fact, you didn't engage your core until someone told you should engage your core. It happens automatically. But when we've actually had some disruption or some muscle imbalance, that's where that system can actually get changed, and then that changes you to use what's called a bracing strategy, which is what Sophie's using now. So, I'm going to get Sophie to think of my hand as an egg. Don't crush it. I want you to let your hips fall down deep into their socket, and I want you to slowly lift your right foot about a centimetre off that bar. Great. So you can feel there you've got tension there now.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So we grade our core from 1 to 5 in this clinic. Sophie's is about 1+. She's doing good, all right? So I want you to lift up again now, just that one, and I want you to try and lift the other leg up without pushing out, all right? So you felt how you braced there? So you're just on the corner of a 2. All right, so the next grade then would be doing a sit-up. Lift your head and shoulders up. Bang. All right, you feel that poke out? All right, so not a grade 3. Grade 4 would be lifting up here and lift up again. It's going to go through there. Yeah. So, sorry, that's grade 5. So grade 3 is where you're doing a sit-up. Grade 3 is where you can lift both legs up. Grade 2 is where we just have egg weight. Grade 1 is where you're keeping the weight on. Now, Sophie's not Robinson Crusoe here. I reckon I'd assess the majority of this room would probably find maybe 10 or 20% could actually have close to grade 3 or 4. So with all my sub-elite athletes, it's the main thing that we're driving. We want to ensure that they can use lower abdominal work appropriately. They don't need to engage it. In fact, if I get Sophie to just draw your belly button in and contract your pelvic floor and lift both legs up, it still happens. So if you introduce a bracing response, you'll still get the same kind of activity with it. You got to do it like if I have my bicep all the time, it's not going to make it stronger. If I add load to it in an appropriate way, it will adapt.
Wait, so grade 1 is good, or grade 5? Like
No, grade 1's
grade 5. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Grade 5's good. Yeah. But yeah, so basically as soon as the legs don't weigh much, so if Sophie lifts both her legs up, that's not much resistance.
Yeah.
If she, and then the trunk weighs a bit more, if she lifts her trunk up, that's going to create more resistance. If we lift both up, it's going to create more resistance. So that's where that grade 5 system is coming from. So if I was going to get Sophie to plank, she'd be bracing all over the show. Thank you, Sophie. All right. Is there any other questions on core?
Just so I understand it right, so there's something about something that's protruding, and if it's a grade 5, it means you can put load on it and it doesn't protrude. If it's a grade 1, a little bit of loading. Is that the
pretty well? Let me put it a different way.
And you basically you're training something to not protrude. Is that?
No, you're trying to strengthen a component not to protrude. Can I get you to grab that one? Grab this one. Alright, and just pull it tight. Alright, so if we think of this as your rectus abdominis muscle, right? Spanning up here, so this is you're the pelvis, you're the ribs. And what would happen if the pelvis wants to meet the ribs, it should come up this way. And what would happen is this would protrude. Now, if I do this and draw this down close to the spine as we do this movement, this whole system now has a purchase system in it. That's far more effective, yeah? So when we don't have this transverse section or core section working, we just get this whole system lifting off the trunk as we're trying to bend up, yeah? This creates a purchase system, which is why the body designed it. And that's what your lower abdominals do. So when I'm retraining this muscle is weak. So if I use a little bit, too much load, it's just too much load for this muscle to deal with it. So I bring the load back to grade 1, take them back to school grade 1, and just introduce enough load to allow that system to work. Then as it gets better, I'll bring it into grade 2. Grade 2 at school, you just expose it to a little bit more load. So that's the way. For some reason, in the early 2000s, we got trapped into, thank you ladies, pelvis and ribs. We got trapped into thinking that we had to engage this muscle. And it wasn't until a study came out in about 2008. And I was giving you this, so, okay, you've got to contract your pelvic floor. What we found that we were creating this whole patient list of patients that had overactive pelvic floors and overactive lower abdominals because they just had them all on at the time. In fact, I still see it now. I see certain Pilates instructors that will come in with overactive pelvic floors. It's really, really tough. They have to down-train their pelvic floor because they've just got it on all the time. And again, it's the same as if we walked around with our biceps on. It's not a muscle, it's binary, it's on, off. The same with your core. So I've digressed a little bit, but I just wanted to expose to you that what core control is. Did that answer that question a bit more? It's when you use to what core should be, simply, it kind of is a little bit of
So do you have an exercise for that, just like you've done Kerr Squat, or you Kerr sit-ups or something?
Yeah. So what we do, say with Sophie is, so Sophie's homework then would be, so just with the feet just on a chair, and then basically keeping this leg at about egg weight, and then lifting that leg up, feeling that she's just got tension. Working in, like I said, to a grade 1 environment. Like, don't expose your primary school kid to university work. We've just got to match the work. So then she'll get up to the point where she can lift both legs without this bracing, and then she get up to the point where she can do a sit-up without bracing, and then get to that point where you do that without bracing. Then you can add long levers to it without bracing, and that all works. Okay, now we're on to ribs. All right, so ribs, super duper interesting. And there's a couple of theories that people have around the world as to why we're seeing this more. Has anyone in this room had a rib injury to do with Ryan? Great, okay, cool. How you recovered from it?
I was in the road for like 3 weeks. It was a tough time.
Yeah, okay. Have you recovered from it?
Yeah, but it flares up if I do too much.
Okay. Well, hopefully there might be some insights with this. So the interesting thing, and these two people will know, but the rest of us you probably won't, is that rib injuries aren't to do with you hitting your ribs. They're actually nothing to do with impact injuries. They're more to do with indirect loading. So it's due to repeated high force contractions of the musculature around the rib cage, not a direct impact with it. What they've found is the majority of these rows, how they present, is they usually have technique dysfunctions, and they can be really subtle, not really, really big ones. They found the majority of rows in this particular cohort with this study that Bittner did, found that these people tended to grab at the catch and they'd open up. So their upper limb to lower limb ratio was out of sync. So what that meant is they'd create more velocity through opening their body in their upper limb than they would in the lower limb at the drive phase of the stroke. And what happens then is you tend to use your traps, which are around your shoulder blade, and the serratus anterior around the front here in a gripping strategy. So as I said there, so opening the body up too early and leaning back too far then becomes an issue because we're really pulling on the abs here as the muscles at the top here put load on the ribs. The diaphragm then gets used as a hospital muscle at the finish. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And this creates a spindle or rib flare position at the finish. So what you're doing is you're overusing your abs, and we're not using our primary hip flexor through the finish position. Let me just re-explain that a little bit with a picture. So you can see on the right here, we've got this muscle that sits on your armpit here. So when you see all the guys, the bodybuilder guys, it looks like they're ribs, but they're not. They're actually digitations of this muscle called serratus anterior. Serratus anterior is actually a pushing muscle, but it also helps stabilise the shoulder blade. And then you've got your external oblique, which is your abs across here. So the two of them meet like digitations of my fingers here. And if we've got the abs pulling one way and this pulling this way, the poor old rib that it's attached to then creates and gets microtrauma. Microtrauma is not bad for the body because your body will adapt to it. But when it's repeated and it's excessive, then we start then present as an injury. The curious thing though is the diaphragm also attaches to this same margin. And this is one of the things that I see with some of the rib patients I see tends to be more of the driver as to why these things don't change. So let me unpack that a little bit. The diaphragm, and this is, and again, part of the topic of tonight's presentation is the resilient rower. So these might be things that you might not be predisposed to, but they're good things for you to be mindful in terms of ensuring that you're getting good longevity and good technical application out of your rowing. Your diaphragm is like a big dome-shaped muscle, like an umbrella. So as I breathe in, it contracts and flattens and pushes on my stomach content, so my tummy gets bigger. As I breathe out, it goes back into a dome shape again, and that's in its relaxed position. So what we tend to do, and again, probably at least half of you in the room are probably already doing this, instead of us breathing through what I call a tidal volume, where you breathe in, stomach gets bigger, breathe out, gets smaller, most of you will be holding a small lung full of air in your lungs, which will splint the diaphragm. And you'll see people who excessively do that, and they'll have what we call rib flares, where your ribs kind of sit and flare. That's where that diaphragm, remember I said it looks like an umbrella, is now flaring out. Instead of like a nice English umbrella, it's flaring a little bit out like a Chinese parasol. That's holding tension up. And so what we see then with those people who are predisposed to a little bit, when they get to the finished position and they re-invert their spine, thinking again that I should hold my spine up, now they've actually induced more load through the ab, more load through the serratus anterior, and you've actually held that diaphragm in. So that poor old rib then is taking a lot of torsion through it. Smaller people who've got thinner ribs don't have as much surface area, so they tend to be predisposed to it. If you've got any kind of history of osteopenia, osteoarthritis, low bone density, that can then be a driver too. So it may not be biomechanical, but there can be some other drivers that go through it. But that can be a technical issue that we can then see that can lead to rib injuries. So, how do we develop resilience in this particular area? Nice, easy diaphragm stretch. So I call this one lighthouse breathing. Good one you can do in the chair here. So again, let me repeat that again. So we call tidal volume is the air that we take in and the air we take out. As you're all breathing here, you're breathing a little bit of air in, a little bit of air out. There is naturally a degree of oxygen or air in your lungs to do that. If it was all out of it, then we wouldn't have the little alveoli open. That degree of air that's trapped in there, that's always there, you change that a little bit, it's called your functional residual capacity. So I find the majority of people, especially people who are anxious, will tend to breathe at what we call high lung volumes. That functional residual capacity, you're holding a little bit too much air in there, and then you're just breathing off the top of it. If I breathe out, it feels nice, right? It feels relaxing. If I breathe in, it feels tense. And so what we're always trying to do is breathing strategy, if you're not needing to be tense, we want to breathe towards what we call low lung volumes. So, and sometimes that's difficult because that diaphragm tends to be in a more splinted position. One thing I didn't refer to is the diaphragm actually, part of its role is in posture. So again, all of us here are using some portion of our diaphragm, probably about 20%, to actually keep us erect. As we start breathing to a point where it's greater than when you go for a jog, and so the point where you can't hold a conversation while you jog, the diaphragm now has shifted all of its use to actually respiration. It loses all its postural control, which is good, it's a good thing. But if you're using postural control during rowing, especially to finish, that's not a great thing, especially if you're wanting to get the most out of your respiratory system. So what's good with the lighthouse breathing, it's a good effective way of us to stretch that diaphragm. So what we do, you take a breath in, and we're going to do this together. Rotate to the, let's all go to one way, we'll go to the right. Alright, and I want you to take a breath into your stomach, alright? Breathe in over 6 seconds. So we're going to breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and breathe out and turn, count to 6, 1, 2, 3. Still breathing out over 6 seconds, all the way. Then take a breath in here over 6 seconds. In, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, These guys up here, they look like the Temptations. The boy band. Great. So, breathe in over 6, then we breathe out over 6. So, what you're doing there is breathing over that 6 seconds is allowing you to slowly breathe the whole rib cage area in and stretch through that diaphragm. But it's the breathing out as you're doing that actually is pulling the margins of the diaphragm down. Now I've got this on your little handout here as a good exercise. I've tried to do all the exercises on the ergo, so it's something you can take home, laminate on the wall. But a really nice, easy one to do, nice one to do at work. But again, I'll just remind you, as we breathe in at the end here, as we breathe out, that's the important bit. You feel a nice stretch as you breathe in, but it's the breathing out as we go through it. So the end, breathe in, and breathe out through that point. Why 6 seconds? I'm glad you asked. I did a very interesting study that looked at, I tapped on before, we talked about 2 modes of our autonomic system, nervous system. We've got, everyone's heard of the fight or flight system, right? Right, that's called your sympathetic nervous system. So that's, your autonomic nervous system is doing everything that you're not conscious of doing. A sympathetic nervous system of that arm of the autonomic nervous system is your fight or flight. So that creates rigidity, it allows you to breathe more, you take more oxygen, you're ready to either run into the dinosaur or run away from it, you're just all amped up. Your rest and breathe one is called your parasympathetic nervous system. What that does is it's where everything's nice and relaxed. And that's where we can't be in a state of tension all the time. So carbon dioxide is a big driver for that. It allows us to kind of relax, whereas the introduction of too much oxygen is the opposite. It's a cool thing. We need to have both those systems in play. So what they found is that when they looked at certain meditative practices, namely, so the Buddhist chant, which is the Om Mani Hari. Is anyone Buddhist here? I don't want to screw this up. Om Mani Hari Om. There's a long. Basically, you say this chant, and it goes for exactly 6 seconds or 5.5 seconds. A lot of the transcendental yoga practices, again, a lot of their chants will go for 5.5 seconds. If you breathe for 5.5 seconds in and out, over a minute, you'll do exactly 5.5 breaths. And you'll approximately, according to the size of your body, take in 5.5 litres. It's this kind of magic Fibonacci number. The rosary, in Latin, goes for 5.5 seconds. So we can see that there's a correlation between this kind of mindfulness and relaxation that we get. Isn't so much necessary with what we're thinking, but our breathing will define that. So if we can get more carbon dioxide rich and be more relaxed, those things can make big drivers. And this is what we're looking from a physio perspective, because we're dealing with so many people that have got high drivers at the moment, with lots of anxiety, those elements, huge parts of mental health, that as physical therapists, we're having to kind of be involved in to try and get people onto that next level. So breathing becomes a big part of our practice with that. So that's why I can highly, just even if you're not doing a lot of rowing, lighthouse breathing is a nice part, and that's why you focus on breathing.
So is lighthouse breathing really just to try and rank up your autonomic nervous system, or are there physiological, there sort of physical benefits as well?
It's more, in the way I've guided it there, it's more the physical benefits, because we're stretching out that diaphragm, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that you can get some from those physiological gains.
And how does that help, stretching your diaphragm up? What does that do?
Oh, the stretching your diaphragm, so that the breath and the breathing out is, sorry, I probably didn't explain that very well. So as you breathe out, the margins of your ribs are coming down, right? And then your abdominal contents are pushing up on the diaphragm, so it's stretching that out.
Right.
And then as we twist it into that position again, we're twisting it. So it's a very mechanical stretch.
And why do you want to stretch your diaphragm?
So a diaphragm, is our principal breathing muscle when we row. So we want that to be working through full range. If you're sprinting, so remember I was saying that we want it to kind of go from that English umbrella all the way down. But what's happening is we're getting down and we don't come to the English umbrella, we go to a Japanese parasol. We're working through that zone, run all the way through. So it's kind of like me being stuck from there to there with my bicep rather than going all through range. So driving that stretch is really good. Thanks for bringing it up.
Is there a breathing sequence you do through the stroke?
Yes, there is, and there can be personal preferences to that. Isn't that is the hallmark of a good presentation? As soon as the question comes, it's actually coming out. I was thinking it should be coming out, but yeah, it's fine. So technique. So what should happen is we take the stroke. We will breathe in, right? And as we come out, we'll tend to breathe out, right? Majority of people do that. In fact, I don't think many of us here would be breathing in and finish. So what happens when we go at that finish position through here and we breathe out? I'm not going to get into technique, but I have to get into a little bit of technique, because technique, there's two modes of rowing at the moment in the world, for those that are in the know with that. I don't think it's contentious at all. I think it's always been the way. The two rowers that I showed you up on there will have rowed. The two techniques were very, very similar. So it all comes down to how we effectively move the boat. But the two techniques for those who are curious is one about as you come in, you come away at the same speed. So the idea is that you're basically looking at the finish, we come in and out at the same speed. That's technique one. I don't know if we call it the West German one, but we will for the moment. The other one is where you come in, you come away, you pause, and then you rock over. Most of the international crews, the Australian international crews, now do that particular technique. Most of the West Australian athletes do a little bit of a hybrid at the moment. Now, there's contention over this pause one because it's actually a very difficult style of rowing to do. Because what happens is, so when we do the usual one, you come in and out, and then basically pause coming into the catch and you take the catch. You've got time to prepare yourself for the catch. So it's easier to teach schoolboy rowers or new rowers that, because there's more time coming forward to make sure we all connect at the same time. When you have the pause at the finish here, when you go forward, you now are going at the same velocity forward. There's no pause to catch, you go straight in. It's a very accurate form of rowing. You have to be quite trained and switched on to create that rowing if you're rowing in a bigger crew with that. So what happens, and that's fine too, I think it's a great way of rowing. Both rowing, either way will work. What I do like about the pause rowing though is it creates what we call secondary velocity. Oh, I've already said I wouldn't get into technique. Very quickly, secondary velocity is that if you come forward at exactly the same speed that the boat's going, you will not interfere with the momentum of the boat. So the big coaches that are keen on this particular style of rowing, if you come away quickly and slow, you are changing two velocities on the slide coming forward. If you keep the same velocity going forward, technically, arguably, you are creating more velocity. And when you watch good rowers do it, you know, if you're out at the Nationals that were here and you saw the New South Wales crew, very good proponents of it, it looks beautiful. It's very smooth as they're coming forward and they're very accurate coming forward. No more technique. But what happens with that particular style of rowing, when you pause at the back here, what I find is people who are exposed to rib injuries in this way is they reinvert their spine at this critical point. And so what will happen is they come to the finish, they'll re-extend their spine, they'll rock over at their hips, and then they'll, and what's happening is you're creating more of that rib load that I was saying. People are susceptible to it, and then potentially will come create an injury. So what you want to think here, and this is what I'm going to talk about here is like not even a 5% change, it's a 2% change. I want you to think about it at the finish here, you think that you're wearing a heart rate monitor, which is over this little bit of your body called your xiphoid process. And you breathe out and you drop that heart rate monitor. So if you all just lean back a little bit, sit forward in the front of your chair, lean back. Alright, and what I want you to do, kind of stick your chest out or your upper abdominal area of your stomach out. Now in that position there, it feels very uncomfortable. I want you to feel, got a heart rate monitor, and you're going to drop that to something down. Good. Take a breath in, breathe out, drop that bit. Just that little drop is what we're looking at the finish through here. Now the reason why that's important is if you look at me side on, if I keep all this rigid, this is a very long lever arm. Let's say that's about a metre. If I have to use all the torque to lead that forward, it's a fair bit of effort. If I shorten that lever, even by a couple of centimetres by dropping, that lever now becomes more efficient. Biomechanically, what you're doing there is I'm using my lower abdominals, as we talked about before, and we're using a muscle called your psoas, which is a hip flexor to come forward. If I'm like this, that all is six-pack muscle. And again, we're setting ourselves up potentially to create excessive load on the front structures. So one thing to be mindful of is how far do we lean back. So basically, if you take your feet out of on an ergo, take your feet out of the straps and you lean back as far as you can, whilst you can keep your weight on your feet, that's pretty good. But what we're also looking at is you maintaining contact through the top of your sitting bones with that. But I'm going to talk about that in another slide, so I won't get too bothered. Resilience with rib injuries is doing what we call pullovers. So this is used worldwide. What you do is you basically, in this position here, you're pulling your arms over and you're doing the depression that I was showing with the heart rate monitor pulled down and pulling your arms up. So what we're training is that system of working your abdominals rather than being in a rib flared position with that. Size busters, I've got that written on your handout too. Your size is your principal muscle. It attaches to your front of your hips and it attaches to your spine. So when we're sitting in this position here, it is helping assist with other muscles to hold my back up. So it's a really, really important muscle for rowing, again, because we want to come off the back with not just one muscle, we want to come off with a collection of muscles. So what we do is, with the size busters, pushing your feet on the ergo, with the feet with the feet in the straps, lean back on the top of your sitting bones, and then you just touch down from each side. And you feel that working through your obliques, your abs, and because you're pushing them through your feet, it'll work your sides then as well. Now the key one with that too, and I've got it written on the form too, is that as you rotate, I don't want you to do that. You want to imagine there's a breadboard across your knees, directly weighted through your two sitting bones, and you're just rotating through your abs, but pushing and leaning back. Can I get everyone just to sit forward in there? Now we're all sitting on our sitting bones, right? There's the bone bits in the butt. So your sitting bones are shaped like fists. So you can sit on the flat part, which I call the top of your sitting bones, or you can sit on the front of them, or you can sit on the back of them, all right, with that fist. So if I roll back here, you'll feel you're going to go look off a little corner, that's the back of your sitting bones. If I sit all the way forward, you'll feel a little corner on the front, that's the front of your sitting bones. That's the top. So stay mindful of being on the top of your sitting bones and lean back as far as you can until you feel yourself roll onto the back. That point where you roll is too far. Just at the point before, that is the limit of your lean back. And again, the caveat is that you still can keep that weight through your feet. There's not going to be anything different. You can kind of try and get more. You're not going to get any more power on the ergo by leaning back and forth. But it's again the interpretation of it. People look at that sort of, oh, I've got to do that. I get school kids coming in, I'm just so short, I need to row longer. And so they're rowing right up here. So, well, what are you doing? You can add into the angle that you can actually create power with. So, yeah, don't get pushed too far. Any questions on the rib? So hip and knee pain. So I only want to go over this kind of quickish. So why we're seeing more hip injuries, there's a couple of theories on this. So the common ones that we see are what we call labral tears or FAI, femoral acetabular impingement. We're seeing this from a physio cohort too. We're seeing people, not just rowers, we're seeing more of these kind of hip presentations. The thing that we feel is the reason why we're seeing these present is that with MRI, they're getting reported more. But what we also know is there's a lot of them that are asymptomatic. So we had it just recently, in fact it was on Monday night, I had one of the orthopaedic surgeons come and have a talk to the team. He was saying, incredibly, over the age of 40, 70% of people have labral tears and they're asymptomatic. So what's happening is that you will have hip pain, we'll send you off to an MRI, and they go, there's a labral tear. It's, oh, okay, well that must be it. You go and have surgery, you've still got pain. So what the orthopaedic surgeons are going is, we don't want to find ourselves in a position where we're operating on a patient that wasn't their pain in the first place. There's a lot of different reasons for hip pain, and again, I don't want to get off track with it, but what I want you to take home from this as a point is what you see on MRI is only really valuable if it matches up with your clinical symptoms. If it doesn't, I've seen so many crazy MRIs of people that I think, wow, why doesn't that person have back pain? And they're fine. My back, L5S1 looks like toothpaste, it's just crushed together, and I don't get back pain. So MRI information has to line up with clinical stuff. So why are we seeing hip pain with rowers? So one of the things that coaches are doing more is exactly what I just showed you before about sitting on the top of the sitting bones. So we'll see people at the catch remaining on the top of their sitting bones. We'll see at the finish being on the top of the sitting bones. All good things. But what would generally happen is when people would come to the catch, they would tend to roll their pelvis underneath them. So that creates more room for the hip. So this means now, when people are in this vertical position through here, that they're creating more compression. So what's important with these particular rowers is that we have the correct foot height. If my feet are too high, it's going to create more compression. As I drop it, it's going to be less, and it's going to allow me to rock over more. So foot height selection is really important, especially for adolescent rowers. It's the one thing that's super important. And again, on your handout, that's actually the first page that I've got on there to ensure that you do get the correct foot height. Now, it's easier to adjust foot height in an ergo. It's harder, especially if you're in a crew, to actually get that done. If you've grounded yourself in a crew, you're all going to be rowing in the same position. Really important that you then transfer your feet height. Very easy to measure. Just hop on the ergo, follow the criteria that I've written on there. Measure from the heel cup, the lowest part of the heel cup, to the top of the seat, and basically take that measurement and actually put that in the boat. And you should be the same. So in fact, me and my pair partner just recently, we had to borrow a boat, and I got in and said, well, this is crap. So we pulled it apart and just re-rigged it. And the other masters athletes that used it said, the boat feels really different. I don't get back pain anymore. Feet were so high. And so it's a really, really, really common thing, an easy thing to change is foot height. Knee pain, look, the most common thing I see is patellofemoral pain, often called tracking syndrome. Probably the majority of people in this room who've got knee pain have had some presentation of that. And that tends to happen for more of our land-based training, with our squatting and those components. It's mainly where the glute muscle here, which is responsible for keeping the knee centered, allows the knee to drift. And so we get more loading through the knee and these structures get tighter. So again, if you're getting knee pain, see a physio, and it's something that you can fix very, very, very quickly and easily. Not related to rowing technique. Are there any questions about knee or hip injuries before we? Oh, hang on, let me talk about the resilience component.
Greg, sorry,
yeah.
just a quick one. If you've got, if your glute medians are imbalanced or they don't engage well, can you feel that sometimes, in your lower back when you're, say, coming to the catch? Can that contribute to a bit of grumpiness?
Yeah, absolutely. So what tends to happen is the muscle will go into spasm, and so when the muscle goes into spasm, what ends up happening is what you do is what we call butt gripping. So now when you're coming into the catch, instead of you being able to dissociate your back and rock through your hips, you're actually gripping underneath you, and now you're wearing all that flexion load through your back. So one of the key things that I want you to think about is releasing those deep hip muscles. And that's what we've got. Oh man, this talk's going good, isn't it? So there it is there. After the release of deep hip rotators, afterward in the gym session. So 2 minutes with the ball. So if you think of your butt cheek as a target, In the centre of the target is what we call your piriformis, and if you roll right up into the 2 o'clock position or the 10 o'clock position is your glute med. Those two rowers should be doing every time they finish on the water or before they're doing a gym routine. So again, that allows you to what we call dissociate. So again, dissociation is where I'm squatting like so. If I'm gripping, that's what it looks like. I'm tucking. This muscle's on all the time. It's gripping. Now muscles can tend to grip because they're weak, and that's where we'll retrain and strengthen. Muscles can grip because they're in pain, and again, you just need guidance on which of those muscles and what it's doing with that. So the other tip I guess you think about with squatting is always squat to the point of spinal neutral. Now remember, we've got a lovely Jefferson squats and doing that component. We want to train the other system though to make sure when you're squatting to a point where your back actually remains in neutral. Because what happens is I'll get to a point, and you'll forgive me, I do have quite good range. So when I get to this point here, you see how my butt tucks underneath me? I don't want to be loading at that point because my back has to go from flexion back to extension. And if I've got a weight across my back here, that's not a healthy thing to do. Go as far as you can whilst maintaining neutral, so then we're working that longitudinal swing. We've got a separate system for working our oblique swing, our posterior oblique swing, the thoraco lumbar fascia one. Foot height, I talked about that before. Any questions about any of those elements?
If you've been told actually to try and get more depth in your squat, what's like the best way to get that?
It's just
doing it.
it's all you've got.
Yeah.
So squat, and that's probably the unfair thing too. And you have to forgive me. I think it's a bit uneducated too for people who might be forcing people working to a deeper squat. But again, if we've got everyone to stand up and squat down, some will get to here, some will get down to here before they actually lost neutral. And when we load, we don't want to go past that point. Because the idea, we've got different lifts to do that. So for example, if I could only get the squat to this point, I'd use what I call a 5-point squat, and I can actually get there and maintain neutral with that. That's a far more effective strategy for me to deal with loads that are like 50, 100 kilos. I wouldn't be doing a Jefferson squat to do that. And even if I was doing a Jefferson squat, like you see the big world's strongest man one, when you use the big boulders, they're going through range, but they've trained that system really, really well to actually do that. So at this level with that, it would be just work within your range. However, caveat for that, sometimes people can have very tight ankles. So as a consequence, they can't get deeper. And so again, it's just figuring out what is your primary redundancy that's leading to you not being able to squat. Tight ankles. So what you can do with that is just have your feet up on a board, and then you'll find you've got that depth. But we only really need you to be at about 100 degrees through your knee to get a good training benefit for rowing with that. Okay. Sorry, everyone good for time? I've probably got 10 more minutes. So getting on to the ergo then. So of all the studies, even the current studies, demonstrate the greatest cause of back pain in rowers is actually the rowing machine. They did this review. There was a fellow I used to row with, who was a physio at the Institute, actually implemented this. It was a great study. It was a great intervention off the back of it. And what they were just seeing all these rowers come down with back pain, and they targeted and realised it was when they increased their session load and they were doing more ergo work. Concept 2, biggest rowing manufacturer in the world, came to the party too, said, how can we make this better? They developed the dynamic ergo, there was a row perfect ergo, a lot of really good information came out of it on how to load. The key thing is that when we row on a static ergo, the first quarter of the slide, there's too much resistance on the machine. It's a simple machine, and when there's a lot of resistance, so what it tends to do, it promotes people opening up early. If you want to get a good score, in fact, if you were to YouTube now, best ergo score 500 metres, you wouldn't see a rower, you'd see this big, huge Turkish guy or something with big muscles everywhere. And he's just rowing like this and just throwing his body back. And So you can trick the concept 2 static ergo. However, that Turkish guy, you would put him in the sky, he's going to probably sink, but he's not going to go very fast, right? So, however, when you're a good rower and you're rowing well, you can apply your load in the right way on the concept 2 ergo, and you can kind of dissipate that, and that's why it's handy with the first force profiles that we see on the force curves. They're a really, really good training tool. With a force curve, we want the force curve to look like Ayers Rock. We don't want it to look like Everest, and we don't want it to look like Everest where it's really like an inverted shark, where it gets up high here and then drops away, or the other way. We want to see lots of area under that curve, and the only way you can do that, even on the concept 2, even if you try and trick it, is actually to create good power through the whole stroke. If you exhaust that power through the first quarter by opening up early, you lose it all at the finish part of it. So anyway, I'm digressing again, sorry. So what they did is they recommended to do all their testing on sliders. And this is great. All the institute athletes, all the basically around Australia, Waze, Sassy, came down to the schools, all the testing was done on sliders. It was so great. I thought it was fantastic, because what we were seeing is rowers then were starting to develop really good rowing technique. They couldn't open up, because if you're on sliders, does everyone know what sliders are? Okay. So on a concept 2 ergo, you've got your pad step here, and then at the back you've got your wheels on it. The sliders, they're like 2 railway tracks that have got elastics on them. You put them on top of these sliders, and as you pull, it'll actually move in different directions. So if you were to open your body up early, it would slide to the other end of the track that it needs to be on. And if you pull, and so it'd be frustrating. You just move up and down. You'd be on the ergo, and then these slides it's on is moving up and down. So when you row properly, it'll actually stay in the same spot. If the forces you're applying through the pushing and pulling are equal, then it'll stay in the same spot. Exactly what we want to see on the water with that. The Row Perfect machine does the same thing, and so does the concept 2 dynamic ergo to a lesser degree. So what they found is there was a huge drop in lower back injuries. It was fantastic. And they found also there was a great kind of bonus, is that all the ergo scores went up. That when you're riding on sliders, there would actually be an improvement of about 5% in terms of your actual ergo score. Sounds great, doesn't it? Why didn't they still do it? So what happened is that everything happens under the leadership of the current head of Australian rowing. He retired, and they got a new guy in, and he said, well, in Canada they don't use sliders, and I want to compare all my athletes on my ergo times to their ergo times, but showing my ergo times are much higher than the Canadian ones. I want everyone to do the same. So sliders went out the window, and bit by bit then the schools stopped using them. And so if you want to buy some cheap sliders, just go to any of the schools and they'll be out the back in that kind of bin. So it was a real shame, because it was a real proactive way of staying on top of back pain in a very, very tangible, easy way, from my perspective. The study there, just outlining what we found there, is that with a static ergo, your basic concept 2, there's an increased load at the catch, leading predisposition for early body opening and bracing. So that upper body bracing, remember from a couple of slides back I was talking. What happens is if you blow and exhaust all your load early, there's nothing much for you to give in the second half of the stroke, especially at the finish. And that's where it doesn't translate onto water work. What's the fastest part of the, when is the boat moving at its fastest speed?
Hands away.
Heads away. So as soon as you take the blade out of the water, you've increased the velocity of the boat at its fastest peak. That last little bit, all you're trying to do is trying to extract the blade to ensure you don't slow it down. So if you're training someone to hit the catch really hard, that's the slowest part of the boat. If they're slow through here, they're not actually retraining themselves to actually be good at the art of rowing in the same way. And that's what I talked about there with changes in coordination pattern at the finish and recovery. So if you've all got your little handout there, you can see on that on the front page of it, I've just got a picture of someone on the ergo where their feet are too high. So just to decipher, because I didn't get the whole ergo in there, if my feet are too high and I make this position here at rocked over, you can see that my pelvis is tilted back. through here. This is what I'm calling the tailbone. So when I come into the catch, which is what the second photo is, still in red, it's still tilted. Optimal foot height will be when I'm at the finishing rocked over with my legs straight, the tailbone will be vertical. If it's too low, it will be tilted forward. So we'll find an optimal point at that point where it will be vertical. And then when we can confirm it, we come to the catch, we don't want that to move too much. So you might think, oh yeah, I can get here, and you've got someone lining up, yeah, you're vertical there. Come to the catch, oh no, you tilted back. Okay, we have to drop it one hole. Pretty well, that height will remain the same for you for most of your rowing career. It doesn't vary much. Unless you gain heaps and heaps of flexibility, you might be within 1 or 2 holes. Keep in mind if you're in bare feet or shoes, that will change. If you've got a bare feet, you'll have to drop your holes down a little bit because the heels aren't holding you up as much. And shoes generally are about 1 hole. So when I'm on my ergo at home, I'll be with my shoes on, be at 3 holes, and then when I have my feet, I'll be on 2 holes, and when I have my feet out, I'll have on 3 holes, we'll be sitting lower with that. And again, what we're doing is we're trying to make sure we can stay on the top of the sitting bones as we're creating that load. We're not putting too much load through the back. As I said, everyone should know that. Basically, I drill into all my school kids when they come and see me here. If I've done the screening after school, so what's your foot height? I say, oh, I forgot. You need to remember it. Okay, we'll do it here. What is it now? Oh, it's 2. Okay. For the left, what's your foot height? It's 2. Okay, cool. And like I said, then being able to transfer that to the boat, it's super, super important. With adolescent rowers, anyone who are rowing coaches, what's tricky about adolescent rowers is their lever arms are always changing. Within 6 months, their trunk has grown. In another 6 months, their legs are growing. In fact, 3 months, their tibia, this section might have grown. All their lever arms change. So it means the biomechanics of the boat has to change with them. And that's predominantly where we'll check feet height kind of at least every season and not just go, okay, it's going to be the same until they're fully grown. Foot pressure. So this is one of those things where you kind of think, this is really obvious. And then you talk to different people and they've got different opinions and think, wow, well, maybe I'm wrong. And then you kind of think more and you study a bit more and go, no, this is really obvious. And this is one of those really, really obvious ones, is foot pressure. Foot pressure throughout rowing, whether or not you're rowing scull or whether or not you're rowing a sweep-oar boat or whether or not you're on the ergo, is you're constantly pushing through the middle of your foot. So we never push through our heels. If we push through our heels, we're going to open our body up early, especially at the catch. If we drop our heels at the finish, we're going to roll onto the back of our sitting bones. If we keep our pressure through what I call either the ball of your foot or the middle of the foot throughout the stroke, that'll ensure that you keep that same pressure, that same postural position through the rowing stroke. The other thing it ensures is that we've got what we call horizontal drive. The thing that leads back here isn't my shoulders opening up, as we've talked about. It's pretty well the small of my back is going to be propelled in a vertical vector straight away that way. And that's going to create the greatest and best load through the oar and the greatest and even load through my body. Right, so this is just explaining what I've done a picture of. Talking about being on the top of your sitting bones. So it's not rolled forward or back like we spoke about. Then we've got that lovely fishing rod. So we've got that lower section here that doesn't move back to a nice more whippier section at the top. And then we get that maximal horizontal force that I was talking about. One thing I will talk about though, which I just realised I didn't have in this talk, is you probably all follow me so far again, okay, I get Greek. So we really want to make sure we curve through here and not sitting up straight because we're just going to create that bracing effect. So I guess I've got to be like this, and I'm going, well, no. How far is too far? The key one for you to think about that is when you're coming forward through here, imagine someone's pulling your collarbones out to the side. That is the setup that we want. If we go to that point, that's too far. So the bookend to this element here is just imagine you've got your collarbones pulled out straight, they're not rounded, and that'll allow you just automatically be in that really comfortable position and set up. But you have to train that sling first. All right, so in summary, so risk factors for injuries, and in particular in this one with lower back pain, is training loads. So when you have gone from training for the long distance kind of work, we tend to not see much breakdown. But as soon as we start introducing high intensity, as a coach or if you're in your crew itself, be really mindful that as soon as you increase volume, that we just got to make sure that that volume is gradually introduced. The intensity isn't erratic. So for example, you might be coming into we've got master's rows here, and we've got school rows and open rows. We all do our big long sessions leading up and before we actually start the season proper. As we start that first race coming back, we really want to make sure we're doing interval sessions with long rests in between. You don't want to do short, sharp, hard rating pieces early. You want to work your way through that through the season. Your gym program, it's probably the biggest area I see injuries. Make sure your gym program is really rowing specific. You've got to kind of question yourself, well, I know I've got to work the swings Greg talked about, I've got to work my quads, I've got to work my back and those elements. So if in your gym program you're doing deadlifting, which is just a neutral, you probably think, I'm not sure if that's the right exercise for me. It's not a bad exercise, it's good like for various sports, but is it the right exercise for rowing? So just seek good experience and advice on if you're setting up a gym program. And I can only really encourage it to ensure that it's really being mindful of those swings and chains. Individual biomechanical setup, which we touched on. The easiest one is foot height. Everything else with rigging is really about load, and that's something that you talk to your coaches about, just ensuring that the leverage that you're putting through is appropriate for your level of rowing. Movement dysfunction. So we touched on this just a moment ago with the squatting question. Sometimes there can be restricted joints or dysfunctions that then impairs movement, and that's where if you're struggling to get squat or you're getting that back pain with rowing, then just seeing an appropriate physio that has a rowing background is really, really important. And so those can be things like tight hamstrings or hip rotators. So take the home message. Lower back pain, rowers will adapt with lower back pain, but seek good expert rowing advice. Lots of great physios out there. Just make sure they've got a background in rowing if you are getting pain with rowing. Swing it, do effective swing-based training for cross training. Flex it, don't be afraid of flexion, bending forward and really engage in that TFL blanket. Rig it, get that correct foot height. That's probably my big one of my take-home messages, that if you can really check that, you'll put yourself in a position that will ensure that you're not putting yourself under excessive load and remaining resilient. Screening. So screening is something I'll just very briefly touch on. Screening can be really handy, especially if you're looking after a big group of athletes. So we do heaps of screening here. We'll go out to schools. We go through, test all the athletes, what their range of movement's like, what their strength's like, and then we get a green light, orange light, red light kind of protocol. Green light, no issues. This rower has no risk of injury. Red light, there are some risk injuries. We're going to manage them with a certain number of exercises, make sure they don't break down. There's great resources on the World Rowing site and also on Rowing Australia on back pain and on injury management. This is a great little schematic, just talking about obviously letting your coach know when you've got back pain. It's you're not living in the macho world anymore, you can't suck it up. Really, back pain, if it's identified early, and the best rule of thumb, if you've got an injury that's lasting 3 days, you just need to see someone. If it's just tightness, it will resolve within those 3 days. If it's past 3 days, the rule of 3 is a good one. You said further help. seeing a doctor or physio that does actually have a background in rowing, and then just getting yourself slowly back into rowing in a graduated program. And that's probably the biggest thing I see, especially with the higher level athletes, some elite and elite athletes I see for rowing. The guys are just wanting to get back in the boat, and we have to slow them down. Invariably, they feel they're going to lose their position, and but if they get back in early, their season's over. So we just slow them down and get them back bit by bit. Again, that's why I find screening is so much better. We identify the problem early before it becomes something where you're not going to be able to row, or it's going to pull you out of the boat at a critical period. On the Rowing WA, the Rowing Australia side, there's a couple of resources with core essentials. Most of those exercises I agree with. A couple of them, especially the track extensors one, I don't so much like in terms of actually trying to specifically train. There's some great little exercises to look at on there, and there's a stretching one too with rowing. So that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
Just because you ripped on deadlifts, what would you do instead?
Well, I guess you're doing Jefferson squats.
Okay.
So doing that flexion loading, yeah. So deadlifts are appropriate, but it's just questioning whether or not they're appropriate for rowing. And it's one of those things that I find that rowing athletes, like I said, we don't go out of flexion, right? So they're not actually necessarily trained to do deadlifts in the same way, and they tend to get injured with them as well in the same way. But I'm not bagging deadlifts. They've got their place, but you do have to think, we've got two sling systems, and you've got to make sure you're working the flexion system then as well. If you're going to do deadlifts, you've got to do both together.
Do you have any specific exercise for stiff side?
With rotation?
Yeah, my rotation, I cannot see my back when I do the scull,
Are you sculling or sweep or rowing?
I am learning, I'm a new learner. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I've just put in there, that rotation, the lighthouse breathing, is a nice easy way to start. You don't need much rotation in rowing. You don't need, even for sweep or rowing, there's not a hell of a lot of rotation. And for sculling, obviously, none at all. So, but yeah, that lighthouse breathing is nice. All right. Look, thank you.